Welcome. Welcome back to Speaks Volumes. This series that has been on hiatus for a little bit, not even on hiatus, I've just been in production of it. Hi, I'm Derrick Gee, and I've been working with my producer Julia Wang on the next season of Speaks Volumes. And to launch, I have a super exciting conversation for you. You're going to love it. This is with a gentleman named Brian Reitzell. He is just go to his IMDb. And that's all I need to say. No, he became who he is through being the music supervisor for his friend's film. And his friend happened to be Sofia Coppola. And that film turned out to be The Virgin Suicides. He ended up working on Lost in Translation, Marie Antoinette, Bling Ring, but also then went on to compose and music supervise for Hannibal, for Friday Night Lights, for American Gods, for games, for TV shows, films, whatever. And I had the opportunity to speak to Brian about how he goes about his work, how he thinks about music supervision, how he thinks about taste, how he thinks about research, how he thinks about gatekeeping. We talk about him working with artists, whether it's Kevin Shields from My Bloody Valentine on the Lost in Translation soundtrack to Mark Hollis from Talk Talk. And he's just a font of knowledge when it comes to music. If you think that I know anything about music, I know nothing about music, and he knows absolutely everything. It's incredible, and it's incredible to see someone so passionate about music continually being passionate about music to essentially not only match up picture with sound, not only create the perfect match between the two, but also to discover and put people onto music. And I think that's what I try to do, and with what I do day to day. But I think that's what drives him and drives everything he does. And it's such a wonderful conversation. We hear so much about the making of Lost in Translation from his eyes and the compositions that he made. And there's so many more stories to come. So enjoy this conversation. It's Brian Reitzell. It speaks volumes. Thanks for hanging around. Before we get into our conversation with the brilliant Brian Reitzell, today's podcast is sponsored by Squarespace, who I've been using for 10 plus years. So if there's anyone to speak to about that experience of using Squarespace for so long, it's me. And what I love about Squarespace is that it's always evolving and they're always adding new features, which I love going back to the website just to see what's new and what I can take advantage of next. So Squarespace is an all-in-one website building platform. They have templates, they have tools. If you are a small or big business, if you want to add memberships, newsletters, photo galleries, if you're a photographer, a blogger, or someone like me, just go to Squarespace and build a website. It's that easy. So here are some of their tools. So they have Blueprint, which they launched last year, which is a system where it asks you a set of prompts. What sort of sections do you like? Here are some templates that you can try to use for those sections. What sort of color palette do you like? We've pre-designed some that you might like. Click, click, click. You can have a website designed, built, live within minutes. It's crazy. You also have the Fluid Engine, which I love because you can drag and drop things exactly how you like it, because I know that you know the best approach for the people that are visiting your website. So you can customize it just so, which is why I've been using it for so long. So head to squarespace.com for a free trial. Go on, do it. And when you're ready to go live, you can take 10% off your first purchase of website or domain by using the code word volume by going to squarespace.com/volume. All right, let's go to the conversation. It is Speaks Volumes, and I'd like to welcome a very special guest into the podcast today. We have the one and only Brian Reitzell in the studio from your home studio, right? Is it home?
No, it's a 6 mile. It's 6 miles from my house. There's a big park in Los Angeles called Griffith Park. My house is on one side, the studio's on the other, so it's kind of a nice commute here.
Myself and Julia my producer had a tour beforehand. There's a lot of things going on in here. One thing I laughed about was when we were emailing and you said we have microphones with $100,000 worth of microphones and no USB mic.
No, but I looked at that one. They're only like $100. I'm going to get one. They might have a nice application for what I do. Who knows?
Maybe it brings a kind of like internet sound to your recordings. Before we kind of get into I have so many questions and I want to introduce you properly, but what are you working on in the studio at the moment?
I can't tell you. I can tell you I'm just starting something that is a one episode of something. And and it's British. That's all I can tell you for right now because it's Hollywood. I will say it's awesome. I couldn't be happier doing this, and I've had to set up the studio to be sort of early 90s England, which is all I'll say about it.
As in you've kind of set the scene to get you in the headspace?
Yeah, well, depending on what it is, I have a lot of instruments and I like to create, I'm the music supervisor and the composer. So once I sort of use my library of songs, meaning, records and stuff that, needle drops, source music, kind of find the tone. And then it's nice when you score it to sort of sometimes connect, have that, those sound worlds at least have some harmony. And oftentimes it just means using some of the same instruments and some of the same technologies and things. And so, it's exciting to you. I never really thought the instruments of everybody thinks of like, old Moogs and Prophet Fives and, the PPG or all, these sort of synthesizers and stuff. You don't, at least for me, I don't really go, oh my God, 1993, what a great time. Or, 94. I was in Red Cross at that time, and it was more about like, that's when Nirvana's Unplugged in New York was probably the number one record. So that's what the music was sort of in my head. But over in Europe, it was a whole other kind of trip going on at the same time that we weren't really aware of unless you went there.
And now you're surrounded by it.
Yeah, well, I went there, so I understand it.
So to introduce everyone to, and tell me how good of a job I do of this, but Speaks Volumes is about speaking to people who have a unique contribution to music. They can be artists, they can be designers, they can be in your case, a music supervisor and composer. And I think I put out a little wish list of people that I wanted to speak to on my Instagram once, and I was connected to you via one of my followers, which is amazing. And where do I start? You've been a part of so many things in the music industry, and I was listening to your Red Bull Music Academy talk and the amount of artists you've touched, worked with, been in rooms with, had to kind of negotiate with, is immense. And I guess, from music history and especially soundtracks, your most well-known work would be either Hannibal or your work with Sofia Coppola in her earlier films, especially up until doing soundtracks for American Gods and everything in between, films, games. And I'm sure there's tons of things that are probably not on your IMDb that I haven't seen. And I think that what I'm intrigued to speak to you about is like that contribution to like music and vision and working with the musicians and all that. How did I do? Is that a succinct summary of you?
Yeah, it makes me a little stressed out thinking I have all these things I have to do. But yeah, that's right. I really am just a guy that wanted to be in a band and make records. And then I did that in my, early 20s. And then I moved into doing film. And then I found that to be a really natural fit. So I went from, and these are all very slow transitions. Like I carried a lot of what I did as being in a band into like the first few movies. I was still kind of making records, you know what I mean? But taking the money from the film studio and catering it, making it fit the picture and stuff. But those were like, I was making records, man. I was not. And then the more I got into it, the more I got into film and where the music is so inside the film to make it more so immersive that the music becomes almost, music concrete. It becomes very abstract because you're hitting all these things that aren't necessarily musical in a musical way. And so I sort of feel like if you look at Virgin Suicides and then you look at something like Hannibal, those are complete opposites, you know what I mean? But it's like going as far as you can. And now I'm sort of going backwards in my own bit of cycling. Cause I was a music supervisor, but I also played drums on the score to the movie The Virgin Suicides with Air. So, and I helped be the sort of mouthpiece between Sophia and them because of, they're French and they had never done a movie soundtrack. Sophia had never done a feature film. But I was able to sort of helped communicate the ideas in a way that I think put me in the middle of being, I remember playing them the song I'm Not in Love by 10cc in the studio because I got like my mastered CD of the soundtrack while we were making a record called 10,000 Hertz, which we made after the Moon Safari tour, Anyway, but they had never heard I'm Not in Love. And listening to that as a pop song, imagine Air's never heard that. It freaked them out. For some reason, I guess that song wasn't a big hit in France, or maybe they just weren't familiar with it.
Were you a music supervisor before Virgin Suicides?
No.
So you were kind of, like you said, like the Sophia hadn't done a feature film, Air hadn't done anything like that, and then you were the same, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the time I had quit Red Cross. No, I was still in Red Cross actually when I started Virgin Suicides, but Sophia just wanted help with, it was a period piece. It took place in the 70s. And she's my friend, we were really good friends, and I'm just a record nerd. I'm a music nerd. She would ask me like, she'd hear a song, whatever, and say, who is this? And I would tell her who it was, where it was recorded, what year it came out, what the cover was like, who was, in the band, it's like, so when she needed to put period music in her movie, she just asked me. She didn't say, would you be my music supervisor? She just said, can you help me? And I said, of course. And, I certainly wasn't doing it for the money. I was still being, a session drummer and stuff at that time.
I feel like that's every person who considers themselves to have good taste in music's dream, to be like the music nerd friend of of a director, a generational director. But not to oversimplify it, but like, what is the difference between someone that has good taste and is a music nerd and a music supervisor? And probably to extend upon that, for people that don't know the role of a music supervisor as we kind of get into this conversation, what is that?
Well, I mean, being a music supervisor, since I didn't go to school for it, I can't tell you really what it is. I only learned afterwards when I started like reading books about it and talking to people. But the thing is what I did on the first movie worked. So I didn't bother trying to do it any other way other than the way that I did it. And to this day, I still have the same sort of approach, the same, I have my own library at home full of CDs and records. Because I was lucky after Lost in Translation, every record company sent me records every single day, physical CDs. And then it became downloads, but there was a good solid 10, 12, 15 years of nonstop CDs. And I digitized every single one. Every single one I digitized. And then I kept a good, 5,000 at home in a library along with my vinyl. So I still like to go into that room and just go, what would this sound like? And then pull out some CDs rather than have, an algorithm tell me, oh, well, you should consider Nina Simone. I don't want that. And that might be easier, but that feels cheap to me. And I want to, be able to bring something special to it. And oftentimes I find if it's not on Spotify, it's like, well, that's a win. Okay. Cause this is a way to turn people on to music. When I did Lost in Translation and stuff, I met people, kids sometimes are just like, you turned me on to My Bloody Valentine, or you turned me on to, Square Pusher, or, whatever it is. And that is just like the ultimate, like, you feel so good that you've pointed someone into into that sort of lovely direction.
Because obviously you're a composer as well as a music supervisor, but keep going on this music supervision thing. What's the process look like? Do you need to see the vision? Are you getting a script and then you're starting to imagine it? Are you like told a little bit and then you go into your record room or whatever and start to rifle through? How does it work?
Every project is different, which is not necessarily a great thing. I can tell you, early on, the first few movies I did with Sophia, I started before the script. So we would talk about things a little bit, never about music really. Or sometimes Sophia would have an artist or a track or two in her movies that would, fuel me in a way. And we, it's a complete collaboration. Everything that I ever did with her was because of some sort of, something I got from her, whether it was from the page, the script, or from talking, or from her photo book. Mostly it was the photo books with her, because she was like really visual, and I could look at this picture. And in fact, when I was working with Air on the Virgin Suicides over there, they turned me on to like some Francis Lay stuff, like Billetees and some of these 70s and 60s and 70s French soundtracks and stuff. And Francis Lay scored that movie with just having a still and then writing a piece of music about it. And in a way, that's kind of what we did with Virgin Suicides. It was more impressionistic, I think, and making complete pieces of music rather than scoring so tightly to picture. And we didn't have the technology then to do it anyway. I was literally looking at a VHS tape down by my hi-hat foot. The drums were covered in blankets, and there was just like a hole like that. And Nicola was playing bass. I could see his head. And then behind that, JB was playing keyboards. And I would like look at the video and cue them with my head to the picture. So that's how we were working. There was no computer back then. It was all done with like ADAT machines and stuff.
And that's the picture of like some of the vision.
Yeah. And it wasn't the finished, it was scenes.
Wow.
It was just scenes before, as the movie was being assembled. But most of it they wrote based on just seeing some of the rough cuts and the script,
And when you say impressionistic, what do you mean by that?
So I mean, you're not following the line of like, if you go completely the other, let's go to Hannibal, where everything is like, with Hannibal, it's like a Carl Stalling cartoon. It's like the music is shifting as everything. It's like a video game. It's so 3-dimensional that it's no longer just music. You couldn't make music like this unless you were working to a picture. It's just too abstract otherwise. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's
like
you were saying, you make records back in.
Yeah, well, it's an impression. You look
on.
at a picture and then you make your sort of impression of that picture as a piece of music, like a 4-minute piece of music, and then you kind of try to cut that into the picture. Whereas the other way, you're actually making music directly to the movement of the picture.
Is there a preference of like one kind of? It sounds like you're inspired by the music, and then you make something, and then that music motivates how it's cut. Whereas Hannibal, it's more by design. Is one preferred or better than the other?
No, they're both just different fun rides. It's like, I do like to play live to the picture and react to the picture. There's something about that technique that is just, it's kind of like you being an audience member and the way that you react to what you're seeing, because we're not dead on things. We're not right when the light bulb comes on. We're processing and we're being more human about our reactions. And so that music, that's kind of a different kind of music. Whereas in the other extreme, working where you're using like a song to put over something, it's more about just the overall emotional connection. But this stuff is all connected. I love them both, man. Really the best way for me is to have my cake and eat it too. It's like when I did Lost in Translation, I started before the script. So I figured out basically what I thought it would be like, or what the character, I didn't actually have the script yet. It was more about Sophia telling me about it. And I had been to Japan with her, and, I'd been there on tour many times. I just knew it, that feeling. So I could build something, and then she could take that and then help her write her script, which helped me finish my second mix, because it all crystallizes down. You don't keep everything, but for the most part, most of it just worked from the very beginning. And then to fill in those holes, which I had to do by doing things like making Bill Murray's ringtones or doing the karaoke. The record store day is about to release a double vinyl. And the second, because there's a bunch of songs that Lost in Translation that didn't work on one record, you know, and it was made when we're talking records, we're talking, you know, 22 minutes aside or whatever. That's all you have. So I had to take all the music in the movie and crystallize that into what I thought would be the best souvenir, you know, not necessarily the best record or the best, you know, whatever, but what I thought was the right souvenir. Because when I listen to it now, it's pretty crazy how the second song, and then you're like riding on a train for into Kyoto before the record kind of opens up with, yeah, it's, but now the karaoke songs will come out. So there's one side is just the karaoke songs. So you could put it on and like have a karaoke party, which is kind of cool. And then the other is, a Chemical Brothers song, a song by, do you want to talk obscure, but there's a band called the Mary Butterworth, who I discovered by my friend Nobu, who had a clothing company in Tokyo, and he played this record one night for me. And it's by a band from LA that put a record out. They only made 500. They only sold them at their shows. This is like high school or you know, they're teenagers basically. And then some German picks up a copy of this, and the internet makes it like the most expensive, like, you know, it's like the gold mine to find this thing. So this record's worth a fortune. It's nowhere to be found. And I found a copy of it and we put it in the movie. So that's on. And then there's a Peaches track in the strip club. And there's a track by my band TV Eyes with Roger Manning and Jason Faulkner, who also did the karaoke songs with me. So the karaoke songs, my band's called TV Eyes with those guys. And then the karaoke songs is essentially the TV Eyes guys doing karaoke.
Oh, wow. So you've covered basically all those things. Yeah.
Well, we had to pick the songs, and because of the way technology was at the time, Sophia was in Tokyo. I had come from either working with Kevin Shields or from being on tour with Air. And then, we had to decide what the songs were. So I would send stuff to Sophia, and then I only had enough time to make the songs here, get on a plane, fly to Tokyo. In fact, I think the last thing we shot in the whole movie was the karaoke sequence. We waited till the very end so that I could physically make the songs, fly to Tokyo, give the actors a day or an afternoon to, you know what they were going to sing. Well, now you could email it, but you couldn't then.
Was it Nobu that introduced you to the Hosono track, or was that you?
No, I did a tour with Air while I did part of this movie, and our opening band for a while was Cornelius.
Oh,
so
wow, cool.
So I went into Kago and I asked him, and then he helped me, but also his bass player, the bass player in Cornelius helped me as well. And he took me record shopping, because I can tell you, going vinyl shopping in Tokyo in like 2001, 2002, you know, there's no cell phones, there's no Google Maps, there's no, you know, it's like, and everything's in Japanese. And they alphabetize stuff. Like if you want an Art Blakey record, you don't go to B for Art Blakey, you go to A for Art. You know, everything's kind of, the R's and the L's it's really crazy. But that's all I would do when I would go to Japan, is to go into the bootleg shops. Like there was a shop in Shinjuku called Airs, ironically, and that was the video place. So like when bands would play Glastonbury, the next day you could buy a bootleg VHS of it at Airs. It was all videotapes. And when bands would come to town, they were all invited to go and pick out. It's how nobody sued them. So they didn't have Michael Jackson or Madonna, but basically every other band you could think of, they had. And there's pictures on the wall of all these, like Thurston Moore with a box of DVD, you know, not DVD, well, DVDs eventually, but VHS tapes, or whatever band was in town, they would go to Airs and load up on stuff.
Wow. And so did you come across your Hosono in the digging phase of research?
I did, yeah. I knew about the Yellow Magic Orchestra, but I didn't know about Happy End. And Happy End, that band and their history is so incredible and so interesting. I got so into that band. And they were so sweet to me. They sent me some books and stuff that have all these great photographs and things that would help me, kind of go down the rabbit hole. Cause I discovered them working on that movie, and I didn't know them. I didn't know that they were using like Little Feat's musicians and like coming to LA and trying to do like the Laurel Canyon thing. And like, I really connect with Japan just because I've always been right next to the Pacific Ocean. And when I go to Japan, I feel there's a vibe, man. There's a really great connection. And that music to me is so cool because it's like Hawaii. It's right in between Japan and California.
I gather you would have introduced a lot of the Western world to it.
Well, I didn't know it. So yeah. I think later on, I've seen some stuff like with Pitchfork and some of these media types that have, said how wonderful that record is. And I know for a fact that it was it was successful when it came out, but the movie really did help. And I think they re-released it, so it became a hit again. It's one of those things. And now it's out there. So it'll probably continue.
I wanted to explore this idea of the impact of kids coming up to you and things, and, Mighty Bloody Valentine and Kevin Shields, and, Virgin Suicides is coming up to, I believe, the 25-year anniversary since coming out, and soon will follow with Lost in Translation and Marie Antoinette, which we also worked on. And I guess, so I used to manage a rap group, and they're young boys. And one in particular really is still obsessed with Lost in Translation. And he talks about like how the music just perfectly matched this feeling of jet lag, of being like kind of lost in another space, of, foreign but familiar, and that kind of soundtrack means so much to him.
Aww.
How do you feel about the soundtrack almost 25 years on, knowing that there are people that were probably born when it just come out, and now feeling like this is who I am, and it understands what I feel so much?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love the story you just told. It's interesting for me because when it originally came out, it wasn't fun for me in a lot of ways, because when I turned the record in, the record company they were disappointed, and that was really hard for me because I really put a lot into it. I think they just expected I was going to give them like Loveless, or I don't know. I don't care. Later, the guy at the record company told me he was going through some personal problems and he loved the record. But the truth is the label had been sold. So that was his way of dealing with what was going on. So our record came out and there was no record company. So in the first week, all the records were gone. Nobody could buy that record. And so they tried as best they could to repress, and they got them out, and they kind of missed that window. And the other thing is the test pressing of the vinyl. At the time, I was a starving musician in a way, and I didn't really have the right hi-fi setup to test the vinyl. And I listened to it and thought, oh, it sounds fine. Or actually, I'm not sure that I did listen to it. I think I passed it on saying, this can't be my responsibility because I just don't have the, nowadays is a piece of cake for me to do it, but back then. So anyway, the pressing was shitty. So it was all because the infrastructure disappeared, and had the record label held on one more quarter, this would have been a massive success for them, and they'd probably still be around today. But that was that. So now it's kind of nice to have it come out and not have any of that bullshit around it. And I like the fact, I like this double record because, one, the pressing is really good. Like Rhino are doing really incredible stuff. Like, I don't know if you heard the replacement stuff, or the Little Feat stuff, they're doing some stuff that just sounds so good. Thank God catalog music has got, we really don't need another Fleetwood Mac Rumors. I'm just saying we got it. Okay. Let's dig a little deeper. And they're doing some really great stuff, but the vinyl sounds really good. And it's nice to have those other songs out there too. Cause I always felt like the Chemical Brothers song, the Peaches song, the Mary Butterworth. They should have been on there, but there was just no way to make that record into one record.
I did have specific questions around Marie Antoinette, and like I think that, you know, the music choices were probably surprising to many, shocking to the genre of what that type of period piece, quote unquote, is. But like, what were the challenges around that?
Well, that it was a period piece. So because it was a period piece, it meant I had really 3 jobs. One was the period music. 2 was the kind of emotional, you know, use my records to create a story and score the movie, because there was no composer hired on that movie. We decided, really the only thing that Sophia and I did decide was that it was going to be like Lost in Translation. So, meaning it was mostly going to be all source music. But we didn't say, oh, let's use New Order or Adamant, but Sophia had referenced Adamant and Bow Wow Wow in her visual book. So she had put like, you know, that into it. And I just eventually just went there with it, and it just seemed to work. But so you had that music, and really that music was all over the place. People say, oh, it's all like new romantic or whatever. No, it's not. That's just a couple of cues. You've got Bow Wow Wow, so you have an Adamant, so you have that style. But then you had bands like Windsor for the Derby and the radio department that were brand new indie, very indie rock bands. I mean, I had to go to Sweden to find the radio department. They weren't like in my record store. Those records weren't here. I can't remember how I found Windsor for the Derby. And so you had contemporary artists, and then you had Air, and you had, you know, some of my I always brought my old friends in. I got Kevin Shields to remix I Want Candy, for a few reasons. But one of the reasons was, one of the things that I always did with Sophia on all of her movies, I don't think there's any exceptions, that if I picked a piece of music, it could never have been in another movie. Or no, not another movie that I knew of. Like if I hadn't seen it, like I found out later that Phoenix's Too Young was in a Fairley Brothers movie, but I didn't put Too Young in the movie. Sophia did. So I still, but I didn't know that. I didn't know that at the time, or I may have argued with her and said, you can't put that Phoenix song in there. It was already in that movie, because I just thought it would always be, you always want to have that, like, you know, the graduate moment or something. You want something to feel like it's so connected to something that it belongs there. And that was my MO from day one. And I think that really helped me when we didn't have the money to license ELO, that we didn't have the money to license Carole King or the Bee Gees. And so what I did is I just always thought, if we did something that was really cool, that seemed like it belonged there, and we showed it to the artist and said, look at it. What do you think? They always agreed. They're like, yeah, that's cool. You know, so I always thought that if you did something that was your own, not my own, but I mean, that hadn't any other connections to any other film cues. Like I wouldn't have suggested, because ultimately it's Sophia's decision, but I wouldn't have put Just Like Honey at the end of Lost in Translation if it had already been in a Fairley Brothers, you know, and I just wouldn't have done that kind of thing.
Does that make your job harder when you find something that's perfect?
Nowadays, it's really hard. Well, you know, Derrick, I always say that I think it's harder to be a music supervisor than to be a film composer in a lot of ways, because you still have to score a scene, but to find music is sometimes like a needle in a haystack. Whereas if you know what it sounds like or whatever, you could sit at a keyboard or whatever, you could put a band together, you could make something in a day, no problem. But sometimes it takes a really long time. Like with Marie Antoinette, for me to get where I got with it, it took, like, I couldn't figure out what that movie sounded like. You know, the stuff that I got very early on was like the Aphex Twin, kind of like the prepared piano stuff. Cause that sounded like opulent, you know, it sounded like, you know, the piano didn't exist in Marie Antoinette's time, but the glass harmonica did. The late 1700s was a really rich and interesting time for the experimentation and the development of musical instruments. There were so many weird instruments coming out at that time. And with the movie being a decent budget Hollywood movie, I spent like days in like museums in Paris and studying these instruments and like getting into that kind of world, which was really interesting. And then trying to put that into the movie. Though I think the only thing we really got into the movie, other than the, harpsichord and Marie Antoinette played the harp. She sang. We did do that. In fact, that's the song that she sings in that movie, because I'm like such a nerd. It's a song that Marie Antoinette really could have sang, and she is partially credited with the song. So all the music that's played in that movie could have really existed at the time. Now, granted, when we recorded like Vivaldi, we did our own kind of Bob Fosse kind of version. But yeah, all the period music is spot on, like the harpsichord stuff, the couperin, the scarlatti, the all of the, when they're eating, the boccherini and all that kind of stuff. Even when they get married in the church, that's a piece by Gabriel Navarre, who was the church organist at Reitzell Speaks for like 85 years. I mean, can you imagine being in the same band for 85 years?
Does that mean, like, when you said, like, I don't know if I'm reading this incorrectly when you said with the internet it's less possible, but do you mean like with the budgets and films that because there wasn't that ready access to all this information online, you had the budget to go to these places and really nerd out and learn? Is that what you meant?
What I meant was that now, I mean, this is like 20 something years ago. I mean, the internet was not a part of it. There was no like type in, a few keywords and ideas would come up. You had to go find them physically. Like I spent all of my time, months and months, in record stores in Paris and in LA for, depending on, whatever the movie was. I mean, I went to Sweden to visit the radio department, and in going there and going record shopping, that got me into my next movie, and then, discovering different artists that way. But then once the internet came out, it's also accessible that it's hard now. So much of it's been done now. So now you're just doing it for another generation, which is great. But I just like the idea of, again, to kind of go back to the Nick Drake thing. I mean, look what happened to Nick Drake's legacy. I mean, it became something that people knew about, but through a car commercial. But however it gets out, I think that's really great. But let's excavate. Let's not use the same stuff over and over again. And let's certainly not, I always thought the audience, like the people that were listening were smart. That they did have good ears, that they would be open to something that wasn't necessarily something that they were familiar with.
Is that a challenge for you when it comes to working with directors and studios and labels to convince them of something sonically that is there to challenge the ear of the audience, that you, as a more refined palette, like for instance, you can go, no, this is fresh, this is new, but it works, and people going like, I want a popular song, I want a pop song, All I can say is that you can't, the beautiful thing about music is you don't really have to talk about it that much. You can just put it on. Like for example, after I did, I think Marie Antoinette, Lost in Translation, I did a movie called Friday Night Lights, which was a big studio budget movie. And I wanted to work with this little 4-piece instrumental band from West Texas that were an instrumental, guitar band, post-rock band. And I had to go in to meet all the heads of producers, people like Brian Grazier and people up at Universal, like literally like vice president of Universal. This is a big budget movie. And so, but luckily Lost in Translation was successful. So these people were happy to meet me. But literally they would talk to me about stuff and I would just say, the script, listen to this. And it's kind of like Sophia with her photo books. It's like, here it is.
And when it works and it's good, like, you're fine. You don't have to sell them. But if somebody comes to me and then, tells me that they want it to be a certain way, or a pop music, I'm not afraid of pop music. I'm not afraid of any style of music. It's all music to me. I'll have to do more research sometimes. With one of the challenges in Marie Antoinette is that Sophia, originally there were 3 opera scenes in the movie. And I didn't really like that era of opera music. I found it to be I just didn't like it. I didn't think it was good. I liked later opera. I liked the Wagner, and I liked some of the dark, weird stuff. But, no, I'm not a big fan of like those Mozart operas and a lot of those sort of mid to 1700s European operas. But I had to find 3 for Sophia to shoot to. And they also needed to be musically good. It had to be something that I liked and that I thought was going to score the scene emotionally, but be a piece of opera music. And it took a month of me listening to this music over and over again. And then one day it clicked. It's like, I like this piece. And then once I found a piece that I liked, I started kind of collecting more, kind of led me down this rabbit hole. For one thing, the composer Gluck, who is Austrian, who Marie Antoinette had sort of, she was Austrian. So, he was her teacher, I think, for a while and stuff. But he was, I think, the first guy to ever put an oboe into the orchestra. And I found the oboe, I love the oboe. And so this was a reason for me to start, zeroing in on stuff that had oboe in it and stuff like that, and sort of finding what I liked in opera. And then once I did it, I put the mix together in like a day. So it was a month of kind of training myself, of figuring out what I liked. And then once I figured that out, I could have a really strong opinion. And then the last opera piece that happens from Castor and Pollux is just like, that felt like a piece of music that like Susie Sue fans would like. The Cure, it's opera music, but it's like Enya on heroin. I mean, it's just this insane piece of music. It's so beautiful. And the thing is all this music had to have been stuff that she really could have listened to. I wanted it to be authentic in that way. So there you go.
Interrupting this fascinating conversation with Brian Reitzell to bring you the sponsor of the podcast. It is Turntable Lab. I smile when I talk about them because they've been supportive of the podcast from this season and last season as well. So Turntable Lab is the home for audio, hi-fi gear, and vinyl. If you're a beginner, you can learn about and build your collection of audio gear that way. Or if you're a hi-fi enthusiast, you can, like me, scroll through their store of speakers and drool as well. And you can also go to the lab, which is part of their site, where you can find 100,000 plus records, guys. You can find probably all the albums you wish you wanted on vinyl there. So scroll through and go crazy. And once you find all your purchases, you can take advantage with their 4 or more deal. Buy 4 or more records, get 10% off. So head to turntablelab.com. But you can also check out turntablelab.com/G, which I have added a few of my recommendations and selections of different audio and hi-fi gear that might interest you. All right, back to Brian. You must have some opinions on taste, because what you say about like, I wanted to find stuff that I liked. I liked the oboe, where you are that protector of this sonic identity of the film. You need to make decisions about what you think is good because you have enough knowledge of music history. You have enough, everyone has a taste, and that's great. But you have to say, no, I'm holding true to this. I like this, and this is going to be better than that.
Well, for me.
Yeah. How do you feel confident in that in a job where you have to work through bureaucracy of people and go, I know that what I like is what is going to work?
I got into this being in bands, and in bands, like when I was in Red Cross, that wasn't my band. So my opinions were like, 1/4 or a little bit. And I just never felt like it was my band. But once you're doing stuff with your name on it and it's you, it's like, you got to make yourself happy. If you make yourself happy, then you can sell it to someone else. But with Sophia, it was just really the chemistry that we had between us. All I cared about was her and me and my girlfriend and our group of friends. I didn't care about what, an audience was going to say filling out cards, because we didn't do that. I mean, this is like punk rock, but these were small movies. These weren't like huge movies. And then when the first few of them just worked, I mean, I got a bit of an attitude. I think it was to protect myself from Hollywood. I got pretty cocky about my stuff because I knew that it was good. I knew it was good. I mean, it's good to me. And if you tell me that what I like isn't cool, then how are you better than me? I mean, we're just two people. This was just my feeling about something. And if I was excited about something, just because I've been doing this since I was like a little teeny kid, like if I can make myself happy, and I've had so many wonderful gurus and mentors and, older brothers and just, people like Kevin Shields, people like, I've had some relationships with some people that I've learned so much from. Sophia, when you work with people, you learn about yourself and you learn about, what works, the more movies you do, which is another reason why I went from sort of Virgin Suicides to Hannibal, where things got so inside the picture. It's just a way to constantly grow and to move. Now I feel like I went the full spectrum. I can kind of go all over the place now. You know what I mean? So, because some movies I'm just scoring, other things I'm just music supervising, but that happens less and less because music supervision to me it's not interesting unless I can just be like untethered and just work with like a director or something. Working with a committee of people that all have to decide that they all like the same piece of music is really not easy. Try and do that with like a bunch of random people. Everybody has their own taste. So you can't like focus on all 5 of these people. Otherwise you'll be mediocre. You've got to like focus on the one that you agree with, that is in the right position to help you, work with them. And that's usually the director. But with TV, it's usually like more of a showrunner kind of. They're different. They're very everything, man. Whether it's a video game, an indie film, a studio film, a one-off, like an episode or a series, everything is completely different. The best ones are to work with a director, though, I think.
It feels like what you're saying is, it is about the relationships and the understanding of these people and the love that you might, or the mutual respect that you have for each other, to trust in each other's craft, if you will. And there are like directors that have storied music supervisors, composers that they know and trust and want to work with every single time. Are there people out there, either peers or people that have existed in the past, where you listen to their work and be like, they do it so well, like music supervisors that really kind of do something different from you that you feel inspired by?
George Draculius is great and has been, I think, like I met George, like, I don't know, my God, back when I was in Red Cross. So, he's been in this a long time. And I appreciate people like Robbie Robertson was someone that I felt like was a really interesting guy, because I like people that really get inside the whole thing, like T-Bone Burnett. There's not many, but I don't really pay that much attention. Oftentimes, it's directors, like whether it's, Wes Anderson is like Wes Anderson. He's doing that stuff. Quentin Tarantino is like, there are some people that I think are really good with music and some people that I think are really bad with music that other people think are good too, that I'm not going to mention. But I just think that it's a really interesting job being a music supervisor, because it can be something as simple as just doing legal music clearances and licensing, or it could be you're actually like going to the record store and sitting there for 8 hours and, trying to figure out what to do and how you have no money. And I have so much respect for all music supervisors because it's such a difficult job. And I think that, I'm lucky. After Lost in Translation for a few years there, I was probably like I was the guy. I really could like I made a lot of money doing that, for what it was compared to what it is now. I mean, what it is now, you have to do like 3 or 4 shows to make, a fraction of what it was like back then. But that's good for movies. All these movies that I worked on in the beginning, it was like, we have really good taste in music. We have no money, can you, Brian, help us? And in a way that got a little gross, and, cause you're always begging, and producers start saying, they just stop budgeting for music. It used to be like, cause I do have a book on music supervision, and it talks about how, when movies were made, there was a certain percentage that was set aside for music. It was like 10%, right? And that just is not the case. And with a 10%,
that sounds like a lot.
Oh, it was a lot. But imagine, I mean, look at what you had to do back then. You had to have an orchestra. Yeah. You had to go into, this was all union. You had to go to a stage. You had to do all the prep of orchestrating and all. It's expensive, man. But, nowadays it can be anything. It can be anything from me sitting on a laptop like we are right now to, being down the street at Warner Brothers on the scoring stage. So,
see, as a music head and perhaps nerd, like many people that listen to this podcast are, do you get excited to find that thing that's like so obscure that you're kind of almost not even representing to the world, to present to the world? And can you think of a moment specifically where you've done that? I'm sure you've done it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know like what anybody knows, you know what I mean? And the thing about something like a movie like Lost in Translation, that came out in like 2003. So some people didn't see it until 2020 or whatever, you know what I mean? So it happens in a lot of different ways. But when I first put something in a movie, and when it first sort of comes out, and that makes, like what happened with the happy end, I mean, that was such a beautiful thing. And I never expected anything. I didn't expect anyone to even like that movie, because it was so like, I mean, nothing really happened, right? But it was a feeling. It was this feeling that we were trying to achieve, and we, of being in Japan.
It's interesting you say about capturing the feeling, because you did say earlier on about the impressionist side of what you do, and I do understand now that you say it. It's filtered through about like Lost in Translation being impressionist in that way. It isn't about anything except for that feeling, and that's what related to my friend, that that feeling of like loneliness and a lot of different feelings. You also mentioned about the graduate moment, and I guess every music supervisor, I have that soundtrack on vinyl for that very reason. It's like it just is perfect. Do you feel like you've gotten there? Do you think like you have one that's like your graduate moment, or is it Lost in Translation? Is it something else?
I don't know. All I can say is that I'm very happy with those first 3 movies that I did with Sophia. There's just such a lovely innocence to everything about the way it was made, and the way, and you just can't really do it like that anymore. I mean, I say that because the word is out, man. I literally, I had to go to other countries to find bands. That's, now you can just, it's all too, and I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that it was a different process, and it's a very romantic process to be running through these cities, like buying opera CDs or whatever it was. It was such a great experience. But no, I mean, I have so many things I'm really proud of. Like I'm, and all these great people I got to work with. I mean, I got to bring a lot of people into doing film that for fun, that had never done it before. And I always felt like, I recently watched Sorcerer, the William Friedkin movie, and it was the first score that Tangerine Dream did, or the first film, the feature film. And the director told them to, and every score of Tangerine Dreams is kind of a different band. It's a different sort of lineup. And Sorcerer is the best lineup. I mean, look, I love Risky Business. It's incredible. But Sorcerer, that era of Tangerine Dream, is my favorite band. So listening to that and record, the music was made. William Friedkin had the band make the music just based on the script. He didn't want him to score a picture. He said, just take this, go make some music. And that's what they did. And it's cool. I mean, it's really hard to work in that way now. I mean, look at Miles Davis scoring, Elevators to the Gallows, where he just had it projected.
I love that story.
It's one of the greatest stories.
Did it in 2 days or something like that?
Yeah. Well, they set up a bar and had the actress like serving drink. Like they set up the whole vibe. I try to work like this too. I mean, I don't have actresses or bars or anything, but with Friday Night Lights, we projected the movie on a giant back wall and the band played along to it. And, I did that for years. That studio was cool too, because it had like oil lamps. So we would have these kind of 60s psychedelic oil lamps on either side of like Billy Bob Thornton and the kids playing football. Vibe is everything, man. It's like, you just like when you're working on a movie, it's like this place. There's no windows in this place. There's a giant screen you can't see, but I have a giant movie screen and I have a projector, which you can see. There it is. Hello, projector. And I just can, I just live inside of the picture. And then when you're making music for whether you're playing songs or scoring or whatever, you can you just live inside that picture. It's a beautiful thing.
I should probably touch on briefly for the people like Elevator in the Gallows, like Miles Davis. The story there is that it's funny because I heard that song. I didn't know about that until I heard the song in the Korean film Burning. And then I was like, what's this song? I think it's called like Générique. And then I found the album and then I found the film. And then I read the story of how they really, I think, wanted Miles for this. And he happened to be in Paris. And they were like, look at this. Let's do this thing. And within a couple of weeks, it was like he was working on it and they'd set up this whole scene and they were reacting to it and recording it. It produced a beautiful album.
Can I add to what you just said too? Because
Please.
I know a bit about this session as well. It's incredible. I mean, Miles Davis was in town and Louis Malle, who is the director, it was his first film and he was really young. And he asked Miles to score it and Miles said no. And Miles was in town, but he read the script. He took the script, left the meeting. And then Miles was doing a tour and he used musicians from Paris because he didn't have the money to fly his guys over, I guess. So he had these Parisian guys. I think a bunch were expat, Americans that were in Paris, because it's kind of how it worked, right? Back then the money for jazz was often in Europe, My favorite part of this whole story is that, so Miles comes back and he's been thinking about, and he wrote a few motifs in his hotel room, which he's told the band briefly what it was. And then, they just friggin' followed him through the movie and they recorded it. But my favorite thing about this story that I only recently learned is that, so this is Miles completely improvising, right? Because he had to, right? This is, somebody put a picture up and they're like, go. He had never done this, right? So after the movie came out, the soundtrack was a massive success. So Miles thought, improvisation, that's the future. And that's when he decided to start doing improvisational records. And that's why you have the beauty, in my opinion, is Miles Davis. Because it kind of wasn't legit to him or in some ways, but that movie was so successful, the soundtrack was so successful, that's when he got deep into improvisation.
Wow.
And it was because of film. Trip, right?
Yeah, it's because of people like yourself and putting these worlds together. I wanted to
process.
Ask you about, yeah. Well, I want to ask you that you've worked with so many icons in music. You talked about Robert Smith and taking him on a personal tour through Versailles, which I thought was just a cool sentence to say. Are there people that you would really love to work with that you haven't yet, that are out there?
I ask myself this question sometimes, mostly because sadly a lot of the people that I really like to have worked with have these guys are dying. Pharoah Sand. I mean, there's so many great musicians that we've lost in the last 5 years or so. So there are some people that I had on a list that I no longer, like, I can't work with David Bowie. You know, with Hannibal, we wanted to have, or the showrunner, Brian Fuller, wanted to have David Bowie play Hannibal Lecter's uncle. And, and I was so like, and Dave Bowie couldn't do it. He wanted to do it apparently, but he was ill. I had this real fantasy about what he and I were going to do. That never got to happen. So really it's, you know, I always aimed really high. You know, I'm lucky I got to spend time with people like Mark Hollis and, you know, Robert Smith, like you said, and Susie, Sue. And, I mean, there's so many people that just kind of have agreed to do this. You know, there's people that I love and would love to involve or work with, but a lot of these people actually have done film, whether it's like, you know, Nick Cave or the Radiohead guys, or, I mean, they're already in that. For me, it's about like, you know, the thing with Kevin was great because I felt like it was the perfect movie for him, but he just wasn't in that world. You know, he was touring with Primal Scream and he wasn't set to do something. So the whole movie is very exciting because it made some sort of a transformation. I really wanted to get in touch with Klaus Schultz, who recently died. I got to get Hasano maybe in here. You know, there are.
He's still kicking. Sakamoto's gone, you know, rest in peace.
Oh, Sakamoto. See, that's the guy I want. Yeah, that's another one. I mean, there's these guys. It's like, and they're too young to die. You know, it's not like these are like old people.
True.
The guitar player in Killing Joke. Honestly, I had been thinking about him and he's no longer here. So
it always surprises me the people in music history that are still kicking around as well. Some artists that I assume have passed long ago. Someone was like, you know, Bobby Vinton's still alive. And I'm like, can I hang out with Bobby Vinton? Like, I'm sure he's very, very old and not. But
you know, some people just like, they just disappear into their like Palm Springs, like, you know, house or whatever. Cause yeah, there was someone I was just thinking about the other day and like, wow, he's still alive, but he just doesn't do anything. And that's fine, man. That's totally.
Yeah, totally. They don't need to do anything. They don't need to be in Hollywood. Everyone has their favorites. Do you think that there is an artist, a band, a catalog that you could put in anything, that you could put in everything, that you feel like, oh man, like this just works, and you kind of find yourself coming back to those sort of sounds? Is that even possible? Like
for me, like what Mark Hollis and Tim Freese-Green did with Talk Talk, especially with a record like Spirit of Eden, more so than Laughing Stock or even, you know, going earlier. There's something about that record and the way that record was made that is probably my biggest inspiration. But that music is often so emotionally gorgeous, or it draws so much attention to itself in a way that you can't necessarily use it in a film very well. The reason I first met Mark Hollis is because actually I wanted him to work on Marie Antoinette. And that was early on. I was thinking, well, if I'm going to do like some virginal like keyboard, or if I'm going to do some woodwinds or something, maybe I can bring Mark in I wanted to do Mark Hollis and Aphex Twin, Richard James. And that was going to be my thing. Richard had given me some stuff, but wasn't really in the position to record new stuff like that. And then with Mark, I decided it wasn't going to work. And I didn't want to ruin things with him. I wanted to wait, you know, maybe down the road something better will happen. So then this other movie came out, and then it was perfect. And I sent him the script and he made some music for it. And it was so good and so interesting and so like just perfect. I mean, he went deep, as you do when you sometimes read a script and you're like, you know, the movie starred Cillian Murphy, and Cillian Murphy has this disorder where he's both the husband and the wife. So he has this split personality. And so Mark had made some music like with the female perspective, the male perspective, and the way he joined them and made this music, you know, over intellectualizing the whole concept of film music, but in a really beautiful and really cool psychological way that I just loved. So I took this movie and temped it with talk stuff and Mark's solo record. So I cut out all these instrumental sections, glued pieces together, made edits and built things and did stuff. So I've seen what a talk movie would look like. And it's beautiful, but it's really strong. You know what I mean? So
I do understand when you say with talk, it is so, I don't want to you, it's the wrong word to say to someone like you, but it is very cinematic. It feels like it's of its own world. And I do understand now that you say it, that it's so loaded with its own stuff that it might be hard.
It overtakes it. It breaks the sauce.
And that's interesting on its own, because I not being a music supervisor, I would think, oh, anything could go with the right thing, but there's certain things that, like, well, talk is a particular group and artist, and I picked up on what you said about not wanting to ruin it, I guess, with Mark, or like finding the right time as well. Do you feel a little bit of responsibility to not bring artists that might have like be icons in your opinion or in my opinion, and bring them on something that might affect their artistry, their legacy, their discography?
Well, I've always felt and that I never wanted to force anybody to do anything. I wanted it to be as natural a fit as possible. That way nobody was acting. I come from punk rock, man. It was all about the authenticity of stuff. You know what I mean? So when I would go to an artist, I would always protect them from Hollywood, from directors, from producers, from the machine, period. And I would never ask them to do anything other than what they naturally did. And the thing that I really never did was I thought about it, and I knew that it wasn't going to work, but like, and I the thing that you can't do is you can't go like when I worked with Kevin didn't want to sound like Loveless era My Bloody Valentine. That was, 10 years ago. It's funny to say it was 10 years ago. It was like 10 years ago at the time, or whatever it was, 12 years ago. So he had moved on. As an artist, you move on. You don't want to like do your thing, right? So he never did that trademark thing. It wasn't later that I think he did some stuff with Patti Smith, and she said, Kevin, this is your thing. Do it. It's yours. You own it, right? And then I think he learned like, she's right. And this feels right. This is me, but I didn't get that out of Kevin. And it's because I never tried to. I wanted him to be comfortable. In fact, when I showed up for Lost in Translation, we were in Camden in London, and down the street from the studio, there was this amazing music store that was like world music. Lots of great Chinese, like, dulcimer type instruments. I can't remember what they're called, all these incredible Eastern instruments. And Kevin bought a whole bunch of them, brought them back to the studio thinking that Lost in Translation was going to be like this Eastern score or something. We didn't use any of that stuff, but that's what you have to do to kind of figure things out. Sometimes you got to try and see what might work,
Yes. And not stifle that kind of inspiration.
Yeah.
I could speak to you for hours, and there's so much, and there's so much to your career that I want to learn about. But I want to ask you a couple more questions before we go.
Of course. Yeah.
Part of your job is obviously making music. Part of your job is finding and putting on and selecting music and for the work that you do. I get asked a lot about music discovery and people struggling to find music and connect with music. How do you discover music now? Really,
in some ways, the same way that I always have, which is print. I love music magazines, and it's crazy how expensive things like Mojo and Uncut and Sound on Sound, like publishing is it's insane. It's like buying a book. Luckily, I have them all. So, I have these magazines that go back to from when I was a kid, like my records. And I discover a lot of stuff that I actually already have. I just never discovered it in some ways. Sometimes it's like, oh yeah, you know this one artist, but you only know one song, or you only know a couple of pieces, and that'll lead you into a whole other world. A lot of artists have these really transformative careers that went from, like, I don't know, reggae to, I mean, what have you ever heard this Serge Gainsbourg reggae record? I mean, that he made
I have,
with, like,
actually.
Sly and Robbie. So if you knew Serge Gainsbourg and you only knew like Melody Nelson or whatever it was, and then you heard that record, you'd be like, it's like a whole different universe. But you know, like everybody, you know, I have Sirius FM in my car. I have laptops, and there's YouTube. I don't find that YouTube basically just turns me on to more of like the same stuff that I've already looked at. I feel like in some ways the internet has kind of hit a wall for me, where it's not recommending as good a stuff as it was a couple years ago, like on YouTube. But I also don't use it that much anymore, because I'm just fortunate for me. I'm in here every day kind of making new stuff myself. But I do have an 18-year-old daughter. So, you know, I do listen to, you know, contemporary music. But what's interesting about contemporary music is contemporary music, because of TikTok, you know, it's crazy. I mean, I can tell you, I was in a club, in a dance club recently. We were all kids, and the loudest response they got was a Neil Diamond song and a Bon Jovi song. And everything else was like EDM, like techno pop, like Nicki Minaj and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But when they played Sweet Caroline, the audience went crazy. And then when they played, you know, Living on a Prayer, again,
Really?
and it's like, yes, this is like 2 weeks ago, at a dance club. So it's an interesting time for like guys like me, or, you know, I don't do as much music supervision. I don't really do it in the same way that I did, but I am starting a project now where I am. So it'll be nice to spend some time on the record.
Yeah, I find it really interesting as getting old. Something I wasn't prepared for is getting older as a music fan, and how music that you grew up with gets reimagined, reinterpreted, or like fallen out of, or back in love with. And I'm yet to have that experience with my kid about like what I will be introduced to and what I'll be put up against, and what I might find horrific about new music or totally inspiring as well. But I really like what you said about like going through the catalogs of people that you only know one song of, because like you said, there's artists that you might be obsessed with it over an album, and then you kind of didn't look at it again, and they've got like 20 more albums where they've gone on this whole journey without you. That is just right there for the taking.
True, yeah. Yeah. And sometimes, you know, if it's a band, sometimes one guy writes the hit and then it's the other guy. It's like the Gene Clark, oh, that's the guy. You know, you kind of, all the tangents, man. But it's crazy how many of these things that I thought were like secrets, you know, like for years I was so into trying to get David Crosby's record. You know, the solo record I'm talking about? It's called I Can't Remember My Name, or something like that. I
think I know the cover.
Yeah, it's like his face and like a sunset.
Yes.
But he's got like guys from the Grateful Dead and Santana and Neil Young and Joni Mitchell, and all these incredible musicians came up and played on this record. But it's such a beautiful, incredible record. He does these things just with his voice, where he stacks harmonies, and that man can sing like an angel. Like, he's never scooping into the notes. He's always just like on. He's like a mellotron. So to hear that thing, I always thought, wow, this is such a great, someday I'm going to put this into a movie, and everybody knows that record now. Well, not everybody, but you know, it's out there. I will say, I remember once I was holding on to a song. This is going to go full circle back to George Drakoulias, because I had wanted to use a song by the Three Dog Night. It's called Easy to Be Hard. And I found it when I was doing Friday Night Lights. And I ended up using a Bad Company song instead. But when I found this song, Easy to Be Hard, it's like, oh my God, this is I'm going to one day put this in a movie. And then I think a year later, the movie Zodiac came out, and George Drakoulias was the music supervisor, and he put that. I don't know if it was him or Fincher, but somebody put that in the movie. It's like, and they use it great, so they deserved it. But That's the only time that's
Wow.
ever happened to me, I must say. So.
That's a wild kind of universe thing, and makes me think about like. I'm speaking to Carl Chaker tomorrow, who's a staff writer for the New Yorker, and he's talking about algorithms and how that's affecting taste and discovery, and I want to speak to him about gatekeeping, but I think that like if anything, if there's anyone that should be a gatekeeper, it should be you, because when you do eventually open the gate, it means something, you know?
Yeah, well, it hopefully it won't squeak, but hopefully it'll be something that you didn't know, and you like. And to me, I think that's the beauty of something is that discovery. That's always the most exciting part. With film, the most exciting part is when you see it with picture and you're like, because it's just undeniable. If something works, it works, and when it's great, it's just like, oh my God.
It's like a whole new medium, right? It's like, it's not music and it's not film. Well, it is, but it's that's cinema in essence, right? Like in a purest sense, it's like when those things perfectly match. It's like it elevates this thing and kind of like tells you about life, like in one shot, I think. But Brian, thank you so much for your time. I think I know that everyone's going to enjoy this conversation so much, and I hope that we can do it again sometime soon. And Brian Reitzell Speaks Volumes is all we can say. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Derek. Great to talk to you, man. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. It was produced by Julia Wang. The branding was produced by Jonny Sikov. If you enjoyed the podcast, I'd appreciate it if you rated it on your app of choice. Give it 5 stars. It helps me continue to produce the podcast by sharing it with more people. If you want, also, it'd be appreciated if you shared it with people that might find it interesting. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next episode.